Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Just had a little brainwave. I was in the middle of filming my ordinary pots as I was watering, and I thought I've got more than enough clips. The video's probably going to be quite long. I'll film the rest of them next time I water, and next time I water is going to be a long time. So I thought I'd carry on filming, and then I can split the clips evenly between two parts, a part 1 and a part 2, and then they can be relatively close together. So that's what I'm going to do, carrying on from where I left off. Now, this is one of the brassicas I got at Burnham's at their 70th anniversary, one of two. And it's done something rather strange, because obviously this was the latest growth, and yes, we do have a new growth coming, but it pushed out one from the previous bulb, which is pushing on quite nicely. Now this took to its repot very well. That's done roots, and it's still doing them off that new growth, and now it's going to start again off of this one. Yeah, so I need to get that sheath off when I've got two hands, and the roots are quite large, fleshy roots, and they grow quite fast. So even though this growth's going to be a little high, it's still going to be close enough for the roots to get down in the pot. So a second new growth on here. There's no reason why they both shouldn't bloom, but they will be quite well staggered. As you can see, that's only just started. Don't think that was even there last time I looked. And this one's pushing on. So this one's going to be in bloom first, and then this one will follow on behind. But that one's pulled on well since it's repot. That's a good pot full of roots there. Very good. So that blooming size, obviously, it was in bloom when I got it, and will bloom again on probably both of those new growths. So that'll be something to look forward to. Probably about the middle of next year, I expect. Now this, whatever it is, lost tag again, or let's put it this way, forgot to put a tag in when I repotted it. This has recovered quite nicely. So from not much of a plant that was potted up, pushed up a nice new growth, and it's starting a second one out of the same position. So that's two growths instead of one. So that's progress. Good pot full of roots. Yet again, tiny little pot. Yeah, can go in a bigger pot when it's filled that one. So that one's coming on well, whatever it is. We'll find out one day. The fact that it's now got a second growth, if it does push a spike out on this one, I'll let it go. Because obviously it'll do roots, so it'll put some strength back into the plant. So enough, if it wants to, we'll let it bloom, but cut them short again. Yeah, don't leave the blooms on there too long, just enough to identify what the plant is, whatever it is. Now sometimes I do silly things, and I think this is classed as a silly thing. Again, at Burnham's 70th show, there was a group of these on the floor in the main sales area, which is a large area, yeah? And as you all know, scale is relative to space, yeah? So these looked quite large, but they didn't look as large as it looked when I got it home into a confined space. So we'll class this as being a bit silly, but I was fascinated by the sheer size, length of the actual spikes, and the number of blooms, their colour, their fragrance. It just had everything going for it, apart from its size, which I'm now going to have to accommodate. Now this one I didn't repot, because Sarah said they hadn't long been done. They'd been repotted at the point where those new growths were pushing on, which were the ones that were in bloom. So that's the previous set of growths. However, I did pick this one for a reason out of the set, because it was the one that had 5 new growths coming on it. They've pushed on well. They're starting to actually form their bulbs now. It looks like they're going to be a little smaller than the previous set, but nonetheless there's no reason why they shouldn't all bloom. So we got 3 round here, and if I can turn the thing round, there's another couple round here as well. Yeah. So now this one's up to full size, so maybe they will push on, and another one here. So we got 5 new growths, so we've got the potential for 5 spikes at a similar time. I think some bulbs may be a little behind the others, but around the same time we should get at least 5 spikes. It could be one of those brassicas that only ever pushes up one spike per growth. So be it. There'll be 5, and I'm looking forward to it. But it's just a monster. Just holding that pot to be able to pour water through it is an effort, to say the least, and I usually get hand ache just trying to water this thing. Now, when it does get repotted, which will be after its next blooming and the new growths start again, it's going to have to be split. I just can't, you know, if I get another 5 new growths on top of this, what sort of size pot is it going to have to go in? All of these new growths around the outside of the pot, they are the last things that can grow in this pot without it escaping out the sides. So it looks like it lends itself to go straight down the middle, quite honestly. So 2, maybe 3 plants, and it's one that certainly in bloom would sell incredibly well, even at an orchid society, you know, where some of them, you know, they take a look at a hybrid like that and say, is that species? No, I don't want it then. There are some like that. Doesn't matter how nice it is, you know. Anyway, a monster. Looking forward to as and when it blooms. Again, it's going to be next year sometime. The spikes will come from in here. Where's the most mature bulb? Probably is that one, actually. There shouldn't be any signs of them yet. No, there's no signs of them yet. So still some growing to do. A lot of the roots off of those new growths have gone straight down in the pot, and I know how Sarah pots large plants like this. It's probably got those polystyrene chip things up to about there, and then bark on top of that. I doubt if that pot is full of bark. I'd have even more trouble lifting it if it was. But anyway, we shall see as and when it comes out of this pot, which is going to be some time away. Got to wait for it to bloom, finish the blooms, get the spikes off, and start the new growths in progress and see some new roots, and then it should divide and split quite well. And we'll see what we can do with it, but really looking forward to seeing these blooms and the fragrance that goes with them. It was powerful. Good stuff. So, coming on well, but then it hasn't been disturbed, has it? We'll see what happens as and when it does get disturbed. Now, this is my Dendrobium delicatum, which I think is another one of these naturally occurring hybrids. A specimen plant of this would live in a bucket, 2 foot wide, and probably have up to 100 canes on it, and I've seen them like that grown in this country. They grow well in the UK on the grounds they love to be freezing cold in the winter, and freezing cold in the winter in the UK is one of the easier things to do. I can't do it specifically that cold, but I think Ed's got a brilliant one of these that he left in an unheated greenhouse that actually got down below 0. And did it bloom? Yeah, it bloomed its head off. They love it. So this is a real cool, dry winter type if you want to get good blooms. Now this was bought off Sarah as a single cane kiki, this one. So relatively it's incredibly slow progress, but it is progressing. It does keep pushing out a nice new cane. I can't remember whether it's 1 a year, but it is slow progress. It could possibly push out a bloom spike this time round. This cane's got, this is the latest growth, and it's got the nubbins, so it may do, although previous canes have had the nubbins as well and failed miserably. So all I'm doing with this is just growing it on. One day it will reach a good enough size to start blooming, but it's a long way off. I think it's done it's done good roots, some of which are escaping out of the pot. But this one's now on rations. This is a cool, dry winter jobby, and that's probably the last thorough watering it's going to get. It has actually finished growing. I could have avoided that watering, but yeah, so that's probably it now. That will get nothing more than a trickle. Just keep my eye on the base of this cane and this cane. Any signs of shriveling, and we'll give it a drink. But a little drink, just a trickle. That's all it'll need. Otherwise, that's finished for the year. So, if only my workload consisted of all orchids like this. I could go and sit down in the armchair and stay there for 3 months. Anyway, we may get some blooms. Incredibly fragrant, but and should be pure white from memory, a long time ago. So, coming on, Now this one took a downward spiral, and it's just the same thing as often is the case. It objected to being repotted, despite the timing being okay and some new roots forming. It just stopped. Just decided, nope, not growing anymore. It started again now. You'll remember the blooms on this. This is my Dontoblossom naeviem, and these are stunning blooms. They're one of my favourites of that particular shape and type. But we do have some new growths. It is coming back. I don't know what the hell it's doing in the pot. Not a lot. A little bit of root sign there. Better on the other side. Come on, out you come. Now we've got some new roots, but that's all it's got. The old roots just dumped. And I think when I repotted it, a lot of the roots were dead and had to be cut off anyway. So, but it's starting to replace its root system, and I can see 1, 2, 3 new growths. So it's coming back, but it'll be slow progress to get back to where it once was. But nonetheless, it's not lost, it's not gone, it's recovering, and we've got new growth, and we've started to get a new root system being generated. So we'll see how it progresses. I'll get this one back to where it was. Trust me. Now this was the Oncidium that came in the same package as the two species Miltoniopsis. Rootless, basically. So potted up, reasonably small pot, and it's done nothing, but the more important thing is that it hasn't gone down. So although it's not physically growing at the moment, it's also not deteriorating. The leaves are still nice and green, yeah, so it's sitting there, and what it's effectively waiting for is either some new root growth from what it's got, or another new growth to produce some roots. So I keep this quite dry. Now I've just picked this up to water it, and it's not getting any. It's still got more than enough moisture in there for a plant that's not growing and hasn't got any roots. If you keep a soggy media under a plant when it hasn't got any roots, some would say you're encouraging some new roots to grow with the moisture, and others might say, well, you're going to rot the base because it's not active. So I'm waiting till I see some root tips before this gets anything like a proper watering. So I just keep it very mildly hydrated, and I mean mild. Media's almost dry, but it hasn't been watered for some time. You can see from the condensation there's still more than enough moisture in there. So awaiting progress on that, but no deterioration. So that's good. Very good, in fact. Well, this is my excuse me, Epidendrum Comet Valley Orange Star. The last time it was in bloom was a stunner, and then the plant just went downhill at a hell of a rate of knots. I never really knew why this happens, but it's coming back. It's a slow progress, but I've got a new growth from the base with roots going down in the pot. Another new growth round here that's effectively a kiki because it's part way up a cane, but close enough to get some roots down. And then several others here, close enough to get their roots down. Now there's some awkward toads up the top here, which are just going to be a nuisance, I suspect. But what I may well do is, come the growing season, these will have roots and open leaves. I'll probably take these top ones off and either put them down in this pot or start a new plant. But it's coming back slowly. I don't know what sort of root system we've got. Very little. Very little. But we've got some of those roots that are getting down in the pot. So I think it's going to recover. But it's a long way off looking how it once did. But because it blooms well and easily, I'm prepared to look after it and get it back, which it's trying. It's putting some effort in, so I'll give it a helping hand. And that is quite dry. That got missed out on the last run because it was still wet, so we'll give it some water today. This is another one that's a nuisance to grow. It grows okay, and I was just sort of thinking, you're looking a bit dilapidated, and that's why it's bone dry. Needs a drink. This flowers on and off when it feels like it. It's just finished a little one here. Tiny little red flowers. Attractive but small. It's a Maxillaria sophronites. Can grow like a weed but has long extensions. You can't contain it. Now in a pot, yes, it's going to grow on, and these will eventually become healthy enough to hang down outside the pot, and it could look quite nice with lots of hanging parts to the plant with lots of little red blooms on. But the roots have got nowhere to go, and unless that's in really high humidity, the roots dry. Put it on a mount, I hear you say. It's been on a mount already, and it climbed off of that very quickly and ended up with the same extensions with aerial roots drying off. So it's just an awkward one to grow. I would imagine where this grows in the wild, because it is a species, it just rambles all over a tree, you know, along branches up and down the trunk, and just goes where it can. But it's probably got high humidity in the air and a lot of rainfall, which would keep it moist, and these aerial roots wouldn't dry off. But you know, in this sort of environment it does dry off. So anyway, it grows okay, and it blooms on and off now and again. It's never had a mass blooming. I think the most I've had is 4 or 5 at once. But I'm keeping it, but it's a worry in as much as it's never going to be easy to grow. It's always going to cause a problem with the long extensions. It's just how it is. But it grows okay. Now I haven't got many of the more maturing plants that are in the why won't you bloom category, but this is one. I give up with it. I'm borderline actually giving up with it. It grows okay. It's got a pot full of flipping roots. It's suffering a little bit from pale leafitis, for the same reasons as a lot of the other Oncidium types. This is actually a Miltonia. It's Miltonia flavescens, so it's a species. And I know others that have had this a while that can't get it to bloom as well. So what's the trick? What is it? What triggers this flipping thing to bloom? Now at the moment, I've got a lot of new growths that are pushing on. They're not mature yet. They haven't formed their bulbs. So it's unlikely to do it yet. But there is quite a bit of new growth activity, stacks of roots in the pot, stacks of aerial roots. It's growing okay. Why won't you bloom? Now, you could say, try more light. Well, it's had that already, hasn't it? That's why the leaves are all pale. So I don't know what to do with this one. Perhaps it's just one of those that when the bulbs mature, it just needs to rest for a bit to try and trigger the blooms. But I was going to say it's a worry, but when a plant's growing reasonably well, it's not really a worry, is it? But there's no point in having it long term if it's not going to bloom. So we'll have to keep our eye on this one. But it's growing okay. It took quite nicely to being repotted. You know, what more can you do? Like I say, you win some and you lose some, and this one is almost a lost cause, reasons unknown. It's one of my 2, I think, antelope type Dendrobiums. It's called black antelope, and with a name like that I was looking forward to some blooms. I'm not sure I'm ever going to see any. Now when I got this, it had 2 canes and 2 new growths. Those new growths pushed on and stonked away, absolutely gorgeous. And then last year in the heat wave, the 2 new growths stalled and suffered badly, and then in successive heat waves it dropped all its leaves, well, which doesn't do a plant any good at all. Now this year it's pushed up this pathetic little thing down here, this one which has also dropped some leaves, and this one where the leaves don't look happy, and it's not a full-size cane. It's finished growing, it's not going to grow anymore. And this is a what to do. What to do? Well, the first thing I can reasonably safely say is last time it was repotted, it went in a pot that was too big for a start, but it's not got any active roots going on. The roots that came out didn't do too well. They probably dried off too much in that hot weather. So that's in a state of doing nothing at the moment. And because it's in quite a large pot, there is still some moisture down in there, so it's not going to get any. And I just don't know what to do with it. I could try repotting it now and get it into a really small pot and take off the old roots, leaving some clearance for these, and they might start to grow, but they could go downhill because it's not producing new roots. So difficult to know what to do with that one. Should I just let it stall, leave it be, and wait for some more new growths and then deal with it and put it in a small pot? Excuse me, or possibly even mount it. But it's not growing, it's dropped its leaves, and it's not producing any new roots, and the roots it's got don't look very good. So this one's going downhill fast. Still not sure why. May have something to do with the larger pot. It could just be that it objected to when it was repotted and therefore stalled. Anyway, not doing well at all. Well, this is my other Dendrobium Phalaenopsis type. This one hasn't got a name, it has white blooms, and this one struggled for quite a few years. This year it just seems to be doing a bit better. I won't say a lot better. You can tell how poorly it's doing by the spikes. 2 blooms on a Dendrobium Phalaenopsis spike is not good stuff. A dozen would be better. But the 2 new canes it's grown this year have got a reasonable colour to their leaves, unlike the older leaves which have been suffering a bit. Yeah, and this year got repotted at the right time, and so it's produced a reasonable root system, and it's in a small enough pot because the damage was done to my Phalaenopsis types. The pots were too large and they stayed wet in the cold in the winter, like similar sort of problem as with the Latorias really. These don't like to get too cold, and cold and wet is just not a good combination. So serious root loss, which we've recovered. We've now got roots, yeah, and we're in a small enough pot that I can water this and it doesn't stay soaking wet for any length of time at all. So I'm managing them better, and as a consequence they seem to be pushing up some nicer looking canes. Oh, actually that old one's got a spike as well. Yeah, so 3 spikes. That's just a good example. This old cane here has already bloomed. Well, they can bloom again from lower down. They don't only bloom from the apex. They will push out spikes lower down. You can see this one's already done it. So yeah, so coming on. Not recovered, but well on the way now. The next set of new growths, hopefully at least 2, maybe 3, even better, will replace those older manky canes and leaves, and then it'll look a nicer plant again. Now this is the bit we don't look at. This is the other Phalaenopsis type Dendrobium, the Thai Angel, the one with the name, and this was the piece that got split off. Very small piece, effectively a single cane with a single new growth and some roots starting. It looks like it's going to have a go at pushing another new growth out, which will be good because this one didn't reach its full size. But what it has done in the meantime is some roots. So it's now got what it needs to get that new growth going. So hopefully it will. And we'll see how it comes on. So it was just a piece that came off when I repotted it. I thought it was worth starting a new plant. It has attractive blooms. So that'll be for somebody else one day. But in the meantime I need to grow it on a bit. Goodness knows what this thing is up to. This is my Phalaenopsis Sweet Memory, and this is doing strange things. These are what the leaves should look like, but without the funny yellow patches. They should be a palish green for Phalaenopsis, and that's the sort of size they can get to. So that's what one would expect as a progression. Now what we've got is a poultry leaf here, and an attempt at another one. That's out of the main crown. Yeah. Now this hasn't long been repotted. It didn't have a brilliant root system, but it had some. But there wasn't really signs of active growth on the roots. And it's decided to push out a plantlet out of the side call it a keiki if you like, but I call them plantlets on this type of plant, monopodials. So we've got another plant coming, and we've got something splitting out of the main stem here. That could be another one of these, could be a root, it could be going to be silly and try and bloom, which I'm not going to let it this time. There's also something coming out the base of that little plantlet, sorry. So goodness knows what this is up to. But it's not behaving itself, it's doing odd things. So all I can do is just let it get on with it and see how it ends up. You know, I mean, I can't really influence it much. It's deciding to grow from the main stem, even though it dropped several leaves. And it's now grown a new plant. So we just have to let it go, see what it does. Who knows? If I don't show the zygos, I'll get told off. Now, this is the no ID hybrid. It has a flimsy, pathetic new growth on it, and very little but some root activity. Very little though. So struggling. That's that one. There's not much more I can say about that. I'm keeping it. It has a new growth, so let's see what it does. You know, give it a chance. I don't know why I bother giving them chances, but I do. Now this one has more chance of success because it's still got some leaves on an old bulb, albeit malformed. But that one did bloom, so that would have weakened it. Again, a root issue. If you haven't got any, you've got an issue. So it didn't swell, it didn't form a pseudo bulb, but then it pushed up another new growth, which is managing to hold on to its leaves, although they're in a pretty poor state. And we haven't really got a root system, have we? We've got some new roots growing from the base, which haven't made the side of the pot yet. So, again, not dead yet. And then this one pushed up a little new growth, which promptly rotted. But then it tried again. And this one isn't doing bad. And this has got quite a bit of backup here because the old pseudo bulbs, the leafless ones, haven't shriveled. So there's some strength in there to get this new growth going, and we do have some active roots. Not many, but some. Now I've just got all three of these out to water them, and because they're not really growing much at all, I'm not going to water that. Most of those roots down in the bottom there, where it's still a bit damp, look seriously iffy. So I'm not putting more water in there. If you, roots, want water, go and find it. And this one, again, that's still quite damp, so you're not getting any. And the other one certainly isn't getting any, because that one's doing next to nothing. So they're not dead, they're not active, not doing much at all, but not dying. And this new growth does have some signs of new roots at the base, so it's going to add to the bit of a root system it's got. So I think this one is going to make it. Dubious, and the other one doubtful. So that's the three zygos. Okay, so that's a look round some of the things we don't see too often, either because they're either not doing much or struggling or whatever, various reasons. But nonetheless, they're still here, not dead yet, and not under the hedge. So as long as they're still here, they're part of the collection. And things are coming on. There's still some that are sitting around doing nothing. They've been doing it some time. But, you know, what do? Give up on them? I've got to the point where I'm almost giving up on plants before, and they just come back and start growing. So sometimes the wait is long and patience is tried. But that's the game, you know, that's what growing orchids is all about. And especially now, you know, I'm bordering on over my workload. Luckily we've come into winter time now, so the workload is eased right off. But come the summertime again, you know, I can quite categorically say at this point I've got too many plants. So something's got to give next year. I haven't made up my mind what, but something's going to have to give. We'll see what happens. But in the meantime, we carry on growing. Those that want to. And those that it's their time, and those that aren't can sit there and do nothing. But when it's predictable, that's acceptable. It's just when they just sit there and doing nothing when they're supposed to be doing things. Anyway, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.